child wakes up because something is breathing outside the cave. Not loudly, not aggressively, just breathing. Slow, wet, heavy. Beyond the thin veil of darkness, something enormous shifts its weight against stone, and for several seconds, nobody inside moves. Not the mother holding her child, not the hunters lying awake with sharpened sticks beside them, not even the fire. Because 40,000 years ago, silence itself could become a survival strategy. Most people imagine ancient humans as primitive creatures stumbling through wilderness with crude weapons and animal skins, constantly overpowering nature through strength and intelligence. That is not what happened. For most of human history, we were not the hunters at the top of the food chain. We were small, fragile, slow, soft-skinned mammals walking upright in environments specifically designed to kill things like us. And ancient humans knew it. Every shadow mattered. Every sound carried meaning. Every patch of tall grass could contain death. Because the earth they lived in was not merely dangerous, it was psychologically hostile. But danger was never the only enemy they faced. There was a second one. Slower, quieter, impossible to fight with a spear. The sky itself. This is a story about the 70,000 years before central heating, before insulated windows, before a single human being could assume that tomorrow's weather would not simply erase them. We tend to imagine early humans as primitive, struggling, barely holding on. That is not what the evidence shows. What the evidence shows is stranger and far more unsettling. Human beings did not survive the climate by overpowering it. They survived by becoming almost unrecognizable over and over again in every place they went. Consider the Arctic. -40 degrees, wind that removes heat from skin faster than a body can produce it, no trees for hundreds of miles, no shelter but what you carry, and what you carry must move with you, because standing still here is a form of death. Most people assume the answer was simply warm clothing. It was not that simple. The Inuit and their ancestors did not just wear fur. They engineered a second skin, layered, breathable, calibrated down to the type of stitch, because a single needle hole done wrong let in enough cold air to matter over an 8-hour hunt. Sinew thread swelled when wet, sealing the seam shut. The parka was not clothing. It was a climate system, worn. And here is the detail that unsettles. They did this without writing anything down. No manuals, no blueprints. Just observation passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation, refined by the brutal editor of failure. If the seam leaked, someone died. The knowledge that survived was the knowledge written in loss. Now travel 8,000 miles south to a desert that kills in the opposite way. Here, the enemy is not cold. It is the sun itself, a sky with no mercy in it, ground that can reach 70 degrees Celsius by midday. The Bedouin and the desert peoples before them did something that looks on the surface like a contradiction. They wore more clothing, not less. Thick, dark, layered robes in the hottest place on Earth. Most people assume this must be some ancient mistake, a cultural habit that simply survived past its usefulness. It is not a mistake. It is physics. The layers trap a thin cushion of air against the skin, and that air, warmed by the body, becomes a barrier against the furnace outside. The dark fabric absorbs radiation before it reaches skin at all, and the loose weave allows sweat to evaporate inside the garment, cooling the body from within like a hidden, self-regulating machine made of cloth. They were not fighting the desert. They were negotiating with it. And this is the pattern that begins to emerge, quietly, unsettlingly, everywhere you look. Early humans were not strong enough to defeat any of these environments. Not the cold, not the heat, not the flood or the drought, or the years when the rain simply did not come. What they had instead was something more fragile and more powerful. The ability to notice and to remember and to pass that noticing on before they died. In 2015, researchers examining Ice Age settlements in what is now the Czech Republic uncovered something that reframed the entire narrative. Woven textiles. 27,000 years old. Not fur, not hide, woven plant fiber, a technology historians once assumed belonged to agricultural societies thousands of years later. Which means the people we picture huddled and shivering in caves were in fact already engineering fabric, already solving thermal regulation with the same intellectual toolkit that would one day design a spacesuit. The image collapses. The primitive ancestor was never primitive. He was already an engineer. He simply left no blueprints, only bones and the objects that outlived him. But clothing was only the surface of the strategy. The deeper strategy, the one that should disturb you a little, was architectural. In the floodplains of what is now Iraq, communities built homes on raised platforms of packed earth, anticipating a river that would, without question, eventually rise and try to take everything from them. Not if, when. They were not reacting to disaster. They were pre-negotiating with the disaster that had not yet happened. In the volcanic highlands of what is now Ethiopia, early agricultural communities terraced hillsides centuries before anyone wrote the word erosion. They watched water. They watched where it pooled, where it cut, where it stole soil from one place and deposited it in another. And they rebuilt the land itself to survive a pattern only visible across many lifetimes. Think about what that requires. It requires a person to solve a problem their grandchildren will face, not themselves. Somewhere in the last ice age, a species evolved that could sacrifice present comfort for a future it would never personally witness. That is not survival instinct. That is something closer to faith. And faith, it turns out, may have been the true technology. Anthropologists studying Pacific Island societies, communities that endured cyclones capable of erasing an entire year's harvest in an afternoon, found something the data could not fully explain for years. These communities did not simply build stronger structures, they built redundant ones. Multiple smaller granaries instead of one large one, scattered gardens instead of a single field. A network, not a fortress. Because a fortress can fall completely. A network can lose a piece and continue. This is not agriculture. This is risk theory, discovered independently thousands of years before anyone had the mathematics to describe it formally. The question this raises is uncomfortable. How much of what we call ancient wisdom is actually just applied statistics, learned the only way statistics can be learned without numbers, through repeated, catastrophic loss? Every civilization that endured did so by the same quiet mechanism. Not strength, not domination. Observation, repeated until it became instinct. Instinct, repeated until it became culture. Culture passed on long enough that it began to look, from a distance, like wisdom. But strip away the reverence and what remains is colder and more remarkable. A species so exposed, so biologically unequipped for extremity that it had no option but to think its way into every climate on the planet. No fur thick enough for the Arctic, no skin resistant enough for the desert sun, no claws, no shell, no venom. Only pattern recognition, only memory, only the willingness to fail enough times in enough places that eventually the failures stopped repeating. Here is the detail that should stay with you. Every convenience surrounding you right now, the wall between you and the temperature outside, the roof between you and the rain, the very fact that today's weather is a minor inconvenience rather than an existential test, is not natural. It is inherited. It is the accumulated residue of 10,000 generations who did not know if the fire would catch, if the seam would hold, if the granary would survive the storm. Most of them are not remembered. Most left no name. They simply noticed something true about the world, adjusted, and passed it forward. A silent transaction repeated so many times that it eventually built the floor you are standing on. We call this civilization, but it may be more accurate to call it something else. A very long, very quiet argument with extinction. One that is, even now, still being carried out. One that has never actually ended.